All right, buckle up, everybody, because we are diving deep today into motor systems. You guys sent in a whole chapter on how our bodies move.
It's amazing, right?
It is. It's incredible. So we're going to break it all down, how our brains, our spinal cords, and our muscles all work together to, make us move.
It's super intricate, and this chapter goes deep, really into the mechanics, which is perfect for this deep dive, I think.
Absolutely. So where do we even begin? With something this complex, how do we break down movement?
Well, the chapter starts with types of movement, and that's a great foundation for understanding how everything works.
Okay, cool. What types are we talking about?
They break it down into three main categories: internal movements, reflexes, and then those voluntary movements.
All right, I'm intrigued. Let's start with internal. What's going on inside?
Think about like digestion. All the muscles churning and contracting to break down food. You're not consciously controlling that.
No, definitely not. You really don't think about that. It's like a whole other world of movement going on that we don't even realize.
Exactly, and that's just one example. Internal movements are regulating all sorts of bodily functions: heart beating, lungs, keeping everything running smoothly. You don't even have to think about it.
Talk about a dedicated crew working behind the scenes. So what about reflexes? I'm guessing those are a little more noticeable, right?
You got it. Super fast, automatic. They protect you from harm. Like the chapter uses the example of touching a tack.
Okay, so how does that work, that whole reflex thing?
So you touch a tack, right?
Yeah.
And those pain receptors in your skin, they're activated.
Ouch. And they send a signal, like a distress call, along my nerves.
Exactly. It goes straight to your spinal cord. But here's the interesting part. It doesn't go all the way to the brain first. It's intercepted by interneurons.
Interneurons, what are those?
They're like the middlemen of the nervous system, really. They relay messages super fast. So efficient.
So it's like a shortcut in my nervous system, like no time to think, just react.
Exactly. The interneurons pass the signal to motor neurons, and those carry the command back down to your muscles.
Which in this case is move your hand away.
Exactly. Fast. It's all about speed and protection when it comes to reflexes.
That's amazing. It really is. It's like our bodies are designed to just keep us safe without us even knowing. So we've covered the stuff we don't control and the stuff we react to without thinking. What about the stuff we actually decide to do?
That's the third category. Voluntary movements. These are the actions you choose to do, right? Like picking up your coffee cup, going for a walk, even just turning a page.
Okay, makes sense. So pretty straightforward, right? I think about doing something, my body does it.
Well, not quite. It might seem simple, but even those basic actions, they involve a lot. Sensory input, motor output, feedback loops.
Wait, hold on. You're saying my morning coffee routine is even more complex than I thought?
Absolutely. Even when you think you're in control, there's a ton of unconscious processing happening. Your body is constantly monitoring its position, adjusting based on feedback from muscles, joints, your vision.
Now that is wild. I never thought about it like that. It's like our bodies are constantly fine-tuning. We don't even know it.
That's right. It's amazing how coordinated and efficient it all is. But to really understand how it works, we need to look at the muscle-brain connection.
Okay, let's do it. How do our thoughts translate into physical movement?
Well, it starts with your muscles, right? Bundles of fibers. They contract to generate force. That's what lets you move.
Okay, got it. But how does my brain tell them what to do? Does it send like a text? Hey, biceps, time to flex.
More like an electrical signal. It's called an action potential. Originates in the brain, travels down the spinal cord to those muscle fibers and tells them to contract.
So it's like my brain is the control center sending commands through this network of nerves, like a circuit.
Exactly, but instead of electricity, we have ions moving, creating those electrical impulses.
So cool. All those signals must use a lot of energy though, right?
You're right, and that's where ATP comes in, the universal energy currency of our cells. Muscles need a lot of it to power those contractions.
ATP is like the fuel.
Exactly. It provides the energy for your muscle fibers to contract and relax so you can move.
Wow. So we've got the brain sending signals, muscles contracting, ATP is fueling the whole thing. But how do the signals actually get from the nerves to the muscles? What's the bridge?
You're right, there is a bridge. A neurotransmitter called acetylcholine.
Acetylcholine, that sounds familiar. Doesn't it have something to do with memory?
Yes, but it also acts as the messenger between your nerves and muscles. It carries the signal from the nerve to the muscle fiber, tells it to contract.
So it's like the final command that gets the whole process going.
Exactly. Without acetylcholine, your muscles wouldn't know what to do. You wouldn't be able to move.
Wow, it's amazing to think about. Even simple movements are so much more complex than they seem.
Absolutely, and we're just scratching the surface. There's so much more to learn.
All right, well, I am ready to keep going. So what's next on our deep dive?
Let's zoom back in on reflexes for a minute. Remember that tack we were talking about? The chapter goes into how that reflex arc works.
Okay, yeah. Let's unpack it. What happens after the signal hits the spinal cord?
Well, those interneurons, those local circuits,
Yeah.
they're really the key to reflexes being so fast and efficient.
I'm seeing how important those interneurons are.
They allow for rapid responses, right, without the brain, which is so important when it comes to protecting yourself.
So my brain's basically out of the loop when it comes to reflexes.
It gets the message eventually, but by then, your hand's moved. Better safe than sorry.
It really is. Amazing what our bodies can do without us even knowing. Okay, so reflexes are quick, protective movements. But what about more coordinated stuff like walking? That seems way more complex.
Right, locomotion, moving from place to place, it is more complex. But the fascinating thing is, a lot of the coordination, it happens in the spinal cord, not the brain.
Really? So my spinal cord does more than just send messages.
Yep, it's all thanks to these things called central pattern generators.
Okay, those sound important. Tell me more.
Think of it as a program built into your spinal cord. It coordinates those muscle actions you need to walk.
So my body comes pre-programmed with the instructions for walking.
In a way, yes. They send those rhythmic signals to your muscles, letting you walk, run, even swim, all automatically to a certain degree.
Whoa, so my brain isn't controlling every step of egg?
Your brain initiates and adjusts your movement overall, but the spinal cord handles the finer control, thanks to those central pattern generators.
So efficient. Frees up my brain to focus on other things while I walk, like not tripping.
Exactly. And it lets you adapt to different things, like obstacles, without even thinking. So, if you stumble, your spinal cord can adjust your step automatically.
Like an internal autopilot for walking. That's wild.
But we can't forget about the brain completely. It plays a huge role in those more complex voluntary movements.
Right, like reaching for my coffee. So how does that work? Does my brain just yell, move arm, and hope for the best?
Not quite. There's a hierarchy, a chain of command for movement, how it's planned and executed.
Okay, let's break down that chain of command. Who's in charge up top?
The frontal lobe, the CEO.
Frontal lobe, but always running the show.
It's where intentions are formed, plans are made. If you decide to reach for that mug, that decision starts in your frontal lobe.
So it's like coffee time. But how does that intention become a movement?
The frontal lobe passes the message on to other areas, the premotor cortex, which helps to sequence the movements.
So like figuring out the steps to actually reach the mug.
Exactly. And then the primary motor cortex comes in. That's the one that sends the signals to specific muscles, tells them when and how to contract.
It's like the conductor of an orchestra, making sure everything works together.
Exactly. And then finally, those signals travel down the brainstem and spinal cord, where they're refined and executed.
So the brainstem and spinal cord are like making sure the orders get carried out smoothly.
Exactly. It's an amazing system. Lets us move with purpose and precision.
It's incredible how much goes into every single movement we make. But with a system this complex, I'm guessing there's a lot that can go wrong.
Unfortunately, you're right. This chapter touches on that too. Disorders that can disrupt the whole system.
Okay, I want to learn about that. What kind of disorders are we talking about?
Well, we talked about reflexes, which are controlled by the spinal cord. But there's another system we haven't mentioned yet, the autonomic nervous system. Mostly unconscious too.
Another unconscious system. It's starting to feel like I'm just along for the ride here.
Kind of. The autonomic nervous system takes care of vital functions. Breathing, heart rate, digestion, things you don't think about.
So like our body's keeping everything running while our minds are busy with other things.
Exactly. And there are actually two branches, sympathetic and parasympathetic.
Okay, two branches. What do they do?
Think of them as opposites. Sympathetic is your fight or flight system. It gets you ready for action when you're stressed.
Like when I have to give a presentation or watch a scary movie.
Exactly. Heart rate goes up, blood pressure too, breathing faster. It's preparing you to either face the threat or run away.
And the parasympathetic is the opposite.
Yep, it's rest and digest, promotes relaxation.
Slows my heart rate down, helps me digest my food.
Exactly. They work together to keep everything balanced, always adjusting.
It's like a dance between gas pedal and brakes, keeping everything running smoothly.
And it shows how complex and efficient our nervous systems really are.
Okay, so these two branches are always working, but you were saying they can get disrupted.
That's right. The chapter highlights a few examples, myasthenia gravis and ALS. They show how vulnerable the system is and how disruptions can really impact movement.
Okay, so myasthenia gravis and ALS. Can you remind me what those are?
Of course. Myasthenia gravis is an autoimmune disorder. It targets the communication between nerves and muscles. Remember acetylcholine, that messenger?
Yes, between the nerve and the muscle.
Right. Well, with myasthenia gravis, the body attacks those acetylcholine receptors. It disrupts the whole pathway.
So the signals from the brain can't get to the muscles.
Exactly. And that causes muscle weakness, fatigue, makes even simple movements difficult.
That sounds really hard. And ALS.
ALS, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, is a neurodegenerative disease. It affects motor neurons. the cells that carry signals from the brain to the muscles.
So the brain loses control of the muscles.
Sadly, yes. Leads to paralysis, eventually affecting things like breathing, swallowing.
That's just heartbreaking. It really makes you realize how much we rely on this system to work properly.
It does, and while there's no cure for ALS right now, there's a lot of research happening. Hopefully new treatments will come soon to slow it down, improve quality of life.
I hope so. It sounds like there's so much we still don't know about these disorders and how to treat them.
Definitely. But there are also some incredible things happening in research. New technologies, therapies. It's exciting.
That's good to hear. So we've covered the different types of movement, the communication between the brain and muscles. But before we move on, I want to go back to those central pattern generators for a second. They really blew my mind. I need to know more.
They are amazing, right? And what's really cool is that they're not just for locomotion.
Wait, really? They do more than just walking.
Yeah, research suggests they're involved in other rhythmic movements too. Chewing, swallowing, breathing.
Wow. So we're basically wired for rhythm.
Exactly, and it's essential for smooth movement.
Okay, I'm hooked. What else?
Well, the coolest thing is they can adapt to different environments, different tasks.
So they're not just fixed programs, they can learn.
That's right. So for example, on a slippery surface, your central pattern generators will adjust your steps to keep your balance.
It's like they know what's going on around me and how I need to move.
Exactly. It's essential for moving safely and efficiently.
This is incredible. I'm really starting to understand how complex this all is.
Me too. And there's still so much more to explore. But I think that's a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we have. It's been a fascinating journey, and I'm ready for more.
Well, get ready, because next time we are going even deeper. We'll talk about proprioception, the senses that tell us where our bodies are in space, and we'll uncover the secrets of muscle contraction.
I can't wait to learn more.
All right, ready to jump back in to the world of movement.
Absolutely. I'm still thinking about everything we talked about last time. It's amazing. All those systems working together, central pattern generators, acetylcholine. It's incredible how much goes into just moving our bodies.
It really is, and we're just getting started. There's so much more to uncover.
Well, bring it on. You mentioned we'd be talking about proprioception next. What is that exactly?
Think of it like your body's internal GPS. It's your sense of where your body is in space, even if you can't see it.
So it's how I know where my arms and legs are without looking.
Exactly, and it's also how you can feel the position of your joints, the tension in your muscles, even how your body's moving as a whole.
That's so cool, like an internal map of my body, constantly updating.
That's a great way to put it, and that information is crucial for coordinating movement.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be pretty hard to walk around if you didn't know where your limbs were.
Exactly. Try playing the piano with a blindfold on. It would be a disaster. Proprioception gives your brain the feedback it needs to make those movements smooth.
Okay, so how does this internal GPS work? Are there like sensors in my body sending signals to my brain?
You got it. We have these special sensory receptors embedded in our muscles, tendons, and joints. They're monitoring things like muscle length, tension, and joint angles, and then they send that information to the brain through sensory nerves.
It's like a constant feedback loop to make sure my movements are accurate and coordinated.
Precisely. And the brain takes that sensory input and combines it with other information, like what you're seeing, to get the full picture of where your body is in the world.
Amazing. I'm starting to realize how much goes into even the simplest movements.
Absolutely. And the chapter talks about two specific types of sensory receptors, muscle spindle receptors and Golgi tendon organs.
Okay, I'm ready to hear more. What do those receptors do?
Muscle spindle receptors are located within the muscles themselves. They're like tiny little stretch detectors. They send signals to the brain when the muscle is stretched.
So if I stretch my arm out, the receptors in my bicep would tell my brain it's being elongated.
Exactly. And that helps to regulate muscle tone and prevent overstretching.
Interesting. So muscle spindles are all about length. What about Golgi tendon organs?
Those are found in the tendons, the cords that connect muscles to bones. They're sensitive to changes in muscle tension. So basically, they're monitoring how much force the muscle is exerting.
So if I'm lifting something heavy, those receptors would be going crazy, sending signals to my brain.
Exactly. And that helps to protect the muscle from damage. By preventing too much force, it's like a safety mechanism.
Wow. So muscle spindles monitor length, Golgi tendon organs monitor tension. Together, they give my brain the full picture of what's going on with my muscles.
That's a great summary. And that information is constantly being sent to the brain, to allow for fine-tuned control of movement.
It's amazing how much is happening to keep us safe and coordinated.
It really is. It shows how complex and efficient our nervous systems are.
So we've explored proprioception and those sensory receptors. What's next? What else do we need to know about movement?
Well, remember how we talked about the hierarchy of motor control? With the frontal lobe as the CEO, the premotor cortex sequencing the movements, and then the primary motor cortex sending the commands?
Yeah.
The chapter actually goes deeper into that hierarchy. breaking it down even further.
Okay, I'm ready for more. So what else is involved in going from thinking about a movement to actually moving?
So once the primary motor cortex sends out those commands, the signals travel down the brainstem and spinal cord. They're refined there and then relayed to the muscles.
So the brainstem and spinal cord are like middle management, making sure the orders from the top are carried out.
Great analogy. The brainstem is really important for posture and balance. And then the spinal cord acts as the final relay station, sending those signals to the muscles.
It's amazing how each part of the system has a specific role in making sure those movements are smooth and coordinated.
And don't forget about those central pattern generators. They're part of this network too, adding another layer of control to those rhythmic movements.
Right, they keep the beat going for those automatic movements.
Exactly. And all these levels are talking to each other, getting feedback, making adjustments to make sure we're moving effectively.
This is blowing my mind. It's like every time we peel back a layer, there's even more complexity underneath.
I know, right? It really makes you appreciate how much is happening, even for the smallest actions.
So we've got these different levels of motor control, but how does a muscle actually contract? Like, how do the signals from the brain turn into a physical movement?
That's a great question, and the chapter does a great job of explaining that whole process, how those electrical signals make the muscle fibers shorten.
Okay, break it down for me. What's happening at the microscopic level?
Well, remember those muscle fibers, those long, thin strands? Each one is packed with these tiny protein filaments called actin and myosin.
Actin and myosin, okay. And what do they do?
They're arranged in a really specific way, overlapping, kind of like two sets of teeth interlocking.
Okay, I can picture that. What happens when the electrical signal hits the muscle fiber?
It triggers a whole series of events that makes those filaments slide past each other.
Wait, so it's not that the muscle itself shortens, it's those filaments inside rearranging themselves.
Exactly. That sliding motion is what creates the force of the muscle contraction.
Wow, that's wild. So what makes those filaments slide?
First, calcium ions are released inside the muscle fiber.
Calcium? I thought those were bones.
It's important for muscles, too. The calcium binds to the actin filaments, and that makes them change shape. They expose these binding sites for the myosin filaments.
So the calcium is like unlocking the connection points.
Perfect analogy. And then the myosin filaments can attach to the actin filaments. They form these things called cross bridges.
Cross bridges, okay. What happens then?
Well, the myosin filaments have these little heads, and they can pivot. So imagine each head grabbing onto an actin filament and pulling it inward.
So it's like a tiny tug of war, with the myosin pulling the actin closer, and that makes the muscle fiber shorten.
You got it. That's muscle contraction at the molecular level.
Incredible. So much is happening on such a small scale.
It's amazing, right? And remember ATP, that energy source. It's crucial here, too.
Right, to power the whole thing.
Exactly. Without ATP, those myosin heads wouldn't be able to pull the actin filaments.
Okay, so we've got the signals from the brain, calcium, myosin, actin, ATP. It's like a perfectly choreographed dance.
And it's happening all the time. Throughout your body, it's what lets you move, breathe, even just sit up straight.
Mind-blowing. But I'm guessing with a system this complex, things can go wrong, besides those neurological disorders we talked about earlier.
You're right. The chapter mentions a few other disorders. One that stood out to me was muscular dystrophy.
Yeah, muscular dystrophy, I've heard of that. What causes it?
It's actually a group of genetic disorders. They all cause muscle weakness and degeneration over time.
So the problem isn't with the signals from the brain, it's with the muscles themselves.
Exactly. It's often caused by mutations in genes that are responsible for making proteins that are essential for muscles. So like the building blocks of the muscle fibers are faulty.
I see. So instead of contracting and relaxing, the muscle just breaks down.
That's right. And that can lead to all sorts of problems. Trouble walking, breathing, swallowing. It can be really tough.
That sounds really hard. Are there any good treatments?
Unfortunately, there's no cure yet. But there are things that can help manage the symptoms. Physical therapy, medications, things to make life easier.
That's good to hear, and hopefully research will lead to better treatments, maybe even a cure someday.
I hope so. There are scientists working hard to understand what causes it, and how to treat it.
That's good to hear. It's a reminder that even with these really challenging disorders, there's always hope for new discoveries, breakthroughs.
I agree. And speaking of discoveries, I think we've uncovered a lot in this part of our deep dive into the world of movement.
Yeah, we have. We've learned about proprioception, the sensory receptors, how muscles contract, and even about some of the things that can go wrong.
It's been quite a journey. I bet our listeners are feeling like experts by now.
I know I am, but I have a feeling there's still more to come. What else is in store for us?
Well, next time we're switching gears a little. We're going to explore motor learning, skill acquisition.
Ooh, interesting. So how we learn new movements improve our skills.
Exactly. We'll talk about practice, feedback, and how our brains actually change as we learn new things.
Wow. Our brains are always adapting. That's amazing.
It is. So get ready for one last deep dive into the amazing world of
I
movement.
can't wait. Let's keep those neurons firing. Okay, we're back. Ready for the final part of our deep dive into motor systems. We've learned so much already about how we move, all the different parts of the system.
It's been quite a journey, right? Exploring this incredible world of movement. And in this last part, we're going to talk about something pretty amazing, motor learning.
Motor learning. Okay, so how we learn new movements, improve our skills, like how I learned to ride a bike.
Exactly, how our brains and our bodies work together to learn new abilities. And what's really cool is that it changes our brains, literally.
Wait, hold on. So every time I practice something new, my brain is actually changing.
That's right, our brains are plastic, they adapt, and motor learning is a great example of that.
That's incredible. I always thought of my brain as like fixed, but it's actually evolving all the time based on what I'm learning.
Exactly, and it means we can keep learning and growing throughout our lives. But let's break it down. How does this motor learning happen? What's involved in learning a new skill?
Okay, yeah. What are the key ingredients?
Well, the most important one is practice. You know what they say, practice makes perfect.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way with piano lessons. But what's actually happening in my brain when I'm practicing?
It's not just memorizing the movements, it's actually strengthening those connections in your brain between neurons, creating these pathways.
So it's like creating a path in the woods. The more you walk it, the easier it gets.
Exactly. And with enough practice, those pathways get so strong, the movements become automatic.
Like when I first learned to drive, I had to think about everything. Steering, braking, mirrors. But now I can practically do it in my sleep.
Exactly. That's what we call automaticity. And another key ingredient is feedback.
Feedback. So like getting information on how I'm doing, like my tennis coach giving me tips.
Exactly. Feedback helps us adjust, refine our technique.
So it's like a cycle, right? Try, get feedback, adjust, try again.
And there are two types of feedback, intrinsic and extrinsic.
Okay, what's the difference?
Intrinsic feedback is what you get from your own body, the feeling of the movement, the sensations.
So like if I'm dancing, I can feel if my movements are smooth or not.
Right. And then there's extrinsic feedback that comes from outside sources, your teacher, a mirror, whatever.
So that tells me if I'm doing the steps right, hitting the notes correctly.
Exactly. You need both types for effective motor learning. Intrinsic helps you understand your body. Extrinsic gives you more objective information.
Like having a compass and a map. Okay, but what about talent? Or are some people just born with it when it comes to movement and skills?
Good question. Researchers have been debating that for ages. Some people might have certain physical advantages, but pretty much everyone agrees practice is what really matters.
So anyone can learn and improve, no matter what.
Exactly. It's about putting in the work, having that growth mindset.
I love that. So it's not just about being naturally gifted, it's about dedication.
Absolutely. And that's where deliberate practice comes in. It's not just mindlessly repeating something.
So what makes deliberate practice so special?
It's about setting goals, focusing, really paying attention, getting feedback, and pushing yourself.
So being intentional, strategic.
Exactly. It leads to way more improvement. The chapter actually talks about a study with violinists. The best ones, they'd practiced way more than the others. Deliberate practice.
Wow, so it's really about the effort you put in, not just talent.
That's the key takeaway, and it applies to anything. Music, sports, even learning a new language, because that uses muscles, too, for speaking.
That's incredible. It's really empowering, knowing that we can get better at anything if we put in the work.
I agree. It shows how much potential we have to shape our own abilities.
Okay, so practice and feedback are key. Anything else that affects how we learn new skills?
The chapter mentions a few other things, like motivation, how much you're paying attention, even your mood.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know I learn better when I'm actually interested in something.
Right. Motivation keeps you going, attention helps you focus, and feeling good just makes everything better for learning and performing.
So it's not just physical, it's mental and emotional too.
Exactly. It all works together, our brains, bodies, and minds. It's pretty amazing.
It is. This whole deep dive has been amazing. We've learned about how our bodies move, the signals, the muscles, the brain, sensory receptors, motor learning. It's incredible how much is going on all the time.
I know. It really makes you appreciate how complex and adaptable our bodies are.
It does. So to wrap things up, I have a question for our listeners to think about. We've talked about conscious and unconscious movements. Where do you think that line really is? How much of what we do is really our choice and how much is just happening automatically?
That's a great question. Something to pay attention to as you go about your day. Notice those effortless movements, the ones you don't even think about.
I know I will. It's a good reminder that there's still so much to learn about our bodies and how they work. It's a pretty incredible system.
Absolutely. So I think we can say mission accomplished on this deep dive into motor systems.
Until next time, keep those muscles moving and your brains engaged.